Mm. Mm-hmm. Oh, amazing. You're amazing. How did you do that?
The joys of slide animations. So, welcome everyone to the April 2023 ENSEL seminar. I am delighted to be joined today by Dr. Abeba Birhane, who is, I think, currently physically located in Trinity College in Dublin, but is affiliated and otherwise socially immersed and ensconced within the Mozilla Foundation. Abeba is a sort of a significant figure and name in the domain of artificial intelligence and machine learning ethics, and has built, I think, a significant, or had a significant impact in that field in what is a relatively brief period of time subsequent to her PhD studies, which were in this area, also in UCD in Dublin. Since then, or sort of prior to the sort of more deep immersion in the AI ethics field, though, Abeba's work included examination of enactive topics and enactive thinking, and was has been engaged in, and I think your views essentially have been sort of somewhat shaped and skewed and oriented by those early enactive and embodied cognition studies. And it's interesting to see that kind of the kinds of insight that sort of continue to thread through your more recent work, including and indeed sort of be sort of striking and dominant in some of the recent papers. So the automating ambiguity paper from that's probably nearly 2 years ago now, is it? Or just last year? You're muted there, Abeba. There have been some technical difficulties already this morning, so it looks like okay. We can pause. So can't hear you yet. Still, in extremis we can.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. Yes, I got it.
The joys of new technological settings as we sort of settle into new places. Just to note the way in which your work has continuously sort of moved around within enactive thinking, and it seems to have been playing a slightly bigger role in some of your more recent work than maybe have gone sort of quiescent for a time. But with things like the automating ambiguity paper and some of the other more recent work, it's interesting to see it sort of take on a more vibrant role, as it were, in some of your recent publications. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you said, that familiarity with the inactive, with the inactive community, the inactive literature, and the whole school of thought of inaction, embodied cognitive science, ecological psychology, and complexity. All that has really given me a really solid foundation in how I approach things, in how I go on about asking questions. Definitely in looking at the bigger picture, it's definitely definitely impacting my thinking and my research.
And of course, it's a research that is at this point could not be any more topical. We seem to just be immersed in this tsunami of AI tools, particularly over the last 18 months. And my social media feeds are just constant torrents of everyone's experiences, positive and negative, with the likes of ChatGPT and GPT-4 and so on at this point. And of course, all the various art or image generators, rather than art generators, as we say. So that, I think, is, as a result, your talk is very welcome and very timely. And it'll be interesting to see the sort of collision, as it were, of enactive and AI thinking as these things become or continue to play such a much bigger role in certainly in academia, certainly in higher education, but also much further afield. I mean, there's no area of life from policing to job applications to housing that isn't being affected by these tools at this point. So
exactly, that's how I'm going to start the talk, actually.
Perfect. Beautiful segue, in we go. So I will invite you now to present the April 2023 ENSIL seminar. Thank you very much.
All right, let me share my screen and hopefully we will not have a problem. Do you see my screen in full?
Yep, all clear.
Right. Yeah, so this is a bit of a speculative work. This is something I'm presenting for the first time, even though it relates to a lot of work that I have been. It takes bits and pieces from from work I've been doing, but it's the first time I'm kind of constructing this argument. I'm putting this argument together. So yeah, let's see how it goes. Yeah, so you were just saying, Marek, yourself, that algorithmic systems are really everywhere, from law enforcement. So this one I took at Dublin Airport a few months back. As you can see, they are using facial recognition technology to monitor borders, for border security. To monitor people and various things. This one, another example is you also find algorithmic systems being applied to things such as the welfare, assigning welfare to individuals and groups. Right. So this was people probably heard about it. This was the Dutch scandal where they used an algorithm to assess welfare benefit claims. They claimed to use the algorithm to spot suspected benefit fraud, and in the end, thousands of families from immigrant background, they were wrongly accused of child welfare fraud. And hundreds of them were asked to pay some money back. And as a result, a lot of people were kind of plunged into financial difficulties. Next slide. Great, my computer is so slow. I'm clicking next, it's kind of slow. Yeah, let's go next. Yeah, so this one is actually very recent. The report came a couple of days ago. Where they used a chatbot called Chai. It's a popular large language model. They used a large language model, I think, an open source variant of GPT-4, and they fine-tuned this chatbot called Chai in Belgium. And this person was chatting to the chatbot, obviously, and the idea behind the chatbot was to provide mental health support. And in the end, the man ended up dying because he got an advice he was encouraged from the chatbot to kill himself. So another example of how algorithmic systems are pervading everything. I'm sorry, my slides aren't advancing. Yeah, okay. Another example, I'll go through this very quickly, actually, because these are just meant to be as a quick kind of overview of where algorithms are used and how ubiquitous they are, how we really find them everywhere. So this one is another report that came out, I think, 2-3 years ago, where they looked at an algorithm that was used to assess the health conditions of people so that they can allocate resources. And again, they were finding that the algorithm was assessing, darker skinned people with the same health conditions, with the same illness conditions as needing less care compared to white patients. Again, another place you find algorithmic systems is in law enforcement, similar to the border control application I showed at the start of the presentation. This is in the US. They have been using face recognition systems to identify suspects, to identify problematic behavior. And people have gone to jail. So far, we know there have been 5 people that have been wrongfully accused and gone to jail because of misidentification from algorithms. And unfortunately, all those 5 cases have been Black men. And these are just some of the cases we know of. These things tend to be not reported strictly because people might even go to jail and still not know why they went to jail, or may not have the means to contest, or may not have the resources to contest these things. So I say 5 known cases because there could be many more that we are not aware of. And of course, we tend to forget a lot of algorithmic systems are not imposed on us. Like when we have to travel, we have no choice but to go through face recognition systems, for example, to cross borders. But sometimes we bring these systems into our own lives. So an example is like a lot of AI assistants, like, Alexa, Google Home, in those vacuum cleaners, automated vacuum cleaners. These applications, we tend to think of them as very benign, kind of, harmful, inconvenient. But of course, they do have implication in our own behavior, in the social world, and in society at large. I'll come back to this point in a bit. Of course, all our interactions, whether we are using, Facebook or Twitter or any other social media, is all mediated by algorithmic systems, of course. And these systems determine what kind of information we see, what kind of ads we receive, who we interact with. And all these systems, whether they are recommender systems or social media platforms, or even computer vision systems like face recognition systems that I showed, that's used for border control, or even the automated vacuum cleaner that I showed in the previous slide. They are all practices of a way of an exhaustive mapping, automating, datafying, and then controlling and influencing human behavior, human action, and society at large. They do impact. This is the speculative part of the talk. This is where I think when we think about the long-term impacts or the effects of algorithmic systems, we tend to think in abstract speculative terms, such as the really problematic area of long-termism, thinking about the welfare of cyborg type of people that in the future might merge with humans. So that school of thoughts, long-termism, and it's the similar ideas tend to that school of thought tend to dominate how we think about the future and living with algorithms, when in fact, what I want to point out in this talk is all this, exhaustive mapping, even as the vacuum cleaner, for example, moves around our bedroom or around our house or around our office. It is, measuring, it's datafying our living space, it's tracking our behavior, it's tracking our patterns, and this does have implication. And these are the questions I want to focus on. These are the questions that I think are much more nuanced and deserve a lot more attention. So I'll just say a little bit about the enactive and embodied side of thinking about humans, society, and complex systems at large. This is something, the INSO audience would be familiar with. We know that, from embodied and enactive cognitive science approaches, from complexity science, we know that human behavior in the social world at large defies any neat classification or datafication or automation or prediction, because people and social systems are embodied beings that are never finished, that are continually being, that are always becoming, with infinite possibilities and potentialities. And furthermore, we do not exist in a social and political or historical vacuum, but rather all that is a necessary component of our existence. So just to highlight this, this was taken from Hannah Dager's Loving and Knowing. Just to get at the heart of it, like, if we can say anything at all about human behavior and about the social world, about, the nature of knowing, it is that it's marked by uncertainties, inconsistencies, and ambiguities and contradictions. And this is also something that has been highlighted by critical complexity scholars such as Paul Cilliers, where they have been emphasizing the non-compressibility, meaning that social systems, including human behavior and the social world, are non-compressible, meaning that they are not something that can be captured by data or model. So even if we assume that we can model, these phenomena, the best we can do is just capture a snapshot of a moving target, because, as I mentioned in the previous slide, these things are constantly moving, constantly changing, and being. I apologize, my slide takes a minute to advance. So it's not only, enactive and embodied CogSci schools of thought or complexity, especially critical complexity schools of thought. The machine learning community itself is coming to realization that, human behavior in the social world is not something you can neatly classify, capture in data and model, but something that's messy, something that defies neat classification and prediction. So this was a research, for example, done by Salganik et al. It had 160 teams, not authors, teams of machine learning researchers, where each team received a huge longitudinal data that was collected by social scientists. And the idea is to model, to build a predictive model of, the futures of children that are coming from underprivileged, poor families. And as you can see from the snapshot from from the abstract that out of the 160 machine learning team, not even one of them was able to build a model that is slightly better than the benchmark itself. The point being that they found the future. They found the predicting life outcomes of kids from fragile families completely unpredictable. Yeah, and just to clarify, however, it's not that human behavior in social world, because human behavior in social world is non-determinable, messy, and unpredictable. That doesn't mean that people or big tech corporations and startups alike will stop developing or deploying or selling various models that claim to predict or to classify or sort human behavior. The whole, the tech world is built on building these models and selling them, usually with a huge hype that cannot be supported by any rigorous questioning. So, and on the one hand, human behavior in the social world is messy and ambiguous and unpredictable. But on the other hand, we are constantly trying to build models, trying to capture it in data, trying to influence it and shape it. The mismatch between these two has implications. The obvious ones are you find, misguided representations of people, for example, face recognition systems failing to recognize certain skin colors, certain genders. That is the obvious outcome, which is known in the AI ethics world as bias systems, discriminatory systems. So those are slightly obvious ones, the ethical questions that a lot of people would be familiar with and a lot of people would focus on. And also, we know that other obvious consequences include, for example, online platforms. We know due to reporting such as Cambridge Analytica, we know that online platforms, because they shape and influence the distribution of information, what we hear, what we see, they also had actually catastrophic outcomes in government, in democracy in general, in influencing voting. Another example, as I said, is wrongful jailing accusation of people based on incorrect facial recognition systems. Again, people based on their race and gender receiving less medical aids is another example where we see the impact of this mismatch. Again, the Dutch scandal of the welfare failure, and so on. Okay. Yeah, and again, the data from the chatbot interaction that was used for mental health is again something people can see and say, this is a big failure. But when things such as, smart home assistants or assistive technology or even, vacuum cleaners come, it's a bit more blurrier to see the impacts of these systems because we perceive them as seemingly innocent and benign systems. But these systems contribute to a total surveillance society and a gradual invasion of personal spaces. So, as I said earlier, as these things, surveil, datafy, map our living quarters, we're left with less and less space to be. And And the other kind of much less obvious consequences are that I'm much more interested in are how we are altering our own behavior. For example, with the knowledge that our job application, our CV goes through some kind of automated system that filters your CV before it goes to a human being. And we know that a lot of corporations, we don't have the facts, we don't have the stats, of course, because a lot of these things are kept as secret. A lot of companies wouldn't admit using this, but we suspect that, especially in the Western world, almost all big institutions, corporations would use some kind of sorting algorithm for hiring. So if you are applying somewhere, before your CV gets to someone, it's very likely goes through some kind of automated system. So as we are aware that this happens, we kind of change the way we write our CV. We kind of change the way we present ourselves. And these are the things that I'm interested in. And so as a result, you go online and you find so many advices on how to beat automated systems and how to write a CV that can game machines. And you find lots of examples everywhere. For example, now that a lot of content moderation is automated, people, especially communities from marginalized communities, as they realize that a lot of their content gets flagged and taken down because of the kind of language they use, and because that's how automated content moderation work, people are gradually altering their language, their interaction online. This has become known as algo speak, meaning algorithm plus speak. So people these days don't say, especially what is the app? On Instagram, a lot of content from adult content producers or pornographic content producers, a lot of their content gets taken down. So they have come to adapt with the way the automated content moderation works. So they are not porn accounts or adult entertainers. Porn has become porn, and instead of using sex, you would use sex. The LGBTQ community, again, these are the kind of communities whose content has been, heavily flagged and taken down. So they are leg booty. So and it goes on and on. And I find these are really interesting and much more, current and much more concrete rather than, futuristic speculative thoughts. And this is, I saw this on Twitter. Let me just play a little bit. So this is people on content producers for Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok. As people become aware that your geographic location impacts your streaming, as they are aware that the streaming algorithm varies based on your geolocation, people fled into most prestigious, richer areas, so that they're streaming, so that they have the geolocation of that space as they are streaming, so that they can take full advantage. So I find this much more fascinating in how living with algorithms are altering our behavior and our language and our interaction. So as I said, this is a lot of kind of speculative work, putting things together, And I'll stop at that. And I would be very eager to hear what people think and if there are any questions as well. And I apologize about the take. My computer is very slow. The slides were advancing a bit slow.
Thank you. That's wonderful, Abeba. Thank you very much for that. It's a domain of riches we try to grapple with it, I think. And I think the examples that you discussed, particularly at the end, the issues around algo speak and the sort of the being essentially, to a certain extent, it's very old school psychology, which is that people's behavior is shaped by the incentives. And if we understand, I guess the idea is that these algorithms are always described as somehow abstract and independent of the messiness of humanity. And they're just sort of capturing the engineering aspects of living in some way, and so often then argued, sort of described in terms of, well, we have identified the underlying principles or the foundations, which we can now then use to optimize how we do our job, whatever that job might be. And of course, as you say, that the whole point is humanity is a moving target. So instead of, once we've changed the incentive structure, the behavior changes too. So you can't engineer the behavior. All you can ever do is, I guess, sort of, dance with it in some way, or so it's kind of interesting to see just how subtle and how dramatic, I guess. I mean, in terms of, let's all go to the same piece of, or the same neighborhood and stream from there, as is a fairly dramatic change in behavior on the basis of what is ostensibly a rather subtle and ungameable idea like geolocation.
Yeah. I'd be interested to hear more about the psychology literature behind this, because at the moment I'm not familiar with any work that is looking at this kind of phenomena as emerging products of living with algorithms.
Yeah, I don't. Well, I suspect there is work being done, but the specifics, I wouldn't be aware of any of the publications. But the principles, I guess, are relatively similar. I mean, you see, it's essentially this is the kind of things like algo speak and the promotion of your stream on the basis of geolocation, and then the change in behavior that they produce almost seem to me like just sort of prime examples of Goodhart's law or Campbell's law, which is as soon as you change a metric into a goal, then the behavior changes and your metric is no longer usable as a metric. And it all seems to be premised on this crucial misapprehension that you've kind of identified a few times, which is just that human beings will always overspill whatever framework you put them in. If you try to datafy something, you will miss something. Yes. And if you think that you've caught the fixed underlying principle, all you've really done is you've spotted what it's been like up to this point, but now you've given it a reason to change too. And the complexity of that just isn't really in the discussion so much yet.
I like your framing of human beings will overspill whatever category or container you put them in. That is a really good phrase.
Yeah. Well, in essence, it's just as you've been describing it. I think it just is that. You kind of said that we cannot, datification will always be incomplete, as just as you said.
Yeah. And you just cannot capture some things in data. You just obviously you are much more familiar with this. You know a lot more about it than I would. But there are things that there are unwritten rules. There are things that as a human you just know. Hannah Dager and colleagues describe it really well in linguistic bodies. There are, interactions that emerge spontaneously. There are things that you understand without interacting, without putting in words. And there are also, if you look at a lot of social norms and social rules, these are things without being explicitly told or explicitly written out. And the moment you write those rules out, the moment they no longer apply. So these are things that you cannot datafy. These are things that are always like fleeting and changing. These are things that you just know by virtue of being a human being.
And I don't know, it's just such a challenge to just get across the very idea of embodied being to people who have lived all their lives in a discourse that essentially says that human beings are computational systems and we're just, we are ourselves just data processors. So we've had a point come up on the YouTube chat here from Ted Powell. Or Paul, apologies if I'm mispronouncing names there. So just a very interesting talk. A lot of the key points hinge on the idea of humans as individuals. But what is your thinking on any notions of solidarity in the age of algorithms, or indeed groups of humans?
Yeah, thank you for pointing out that it does. In retrospect, yes, the talk does. It's very individualistic, which is very unlike me. But yes, that's true. My thoughts on, as I said at the beginning of the talk, my background is, in the embodied enactive cog-sci. So my foundation really is also, I have some familiarity, some background with a lot of Black feminist scholars, Afro-feminist scholars, which share a lot of, foundational thinking when it comes to thinking about, the collective, communal thinking, being, knowledge production as something that are necessarily and essentially grounded in communities, in groups, in societies. So my thinking obviously is that, the focus on individual behaviors is not going to be very productive, because at the end of the day, we really are relational through and through. Everything we do is intertwined, interconnected. We influence others, others influence us. We are constantly in this, social, historical, cultural relation where our thinking, our writing, our being is necessarily grounded in that environment. So obviously, you cannot separate the individual from the environmental, from their environment, from their ecology, from their milieu. So I do agree. It's really important to focus on that. And usually, I do focus on a lot of my writing and my thinking is grounded in that. But I guess it's easier to pick out examples where you see people doing certain things, and it's easy to focus at people. Look, they are doing this as a result of this. Look, in China, for example, doing users are going under a bridge in a wealthy area. Look, marginalized communities online are adapting their language, because if they use the word kill, their content will be taken down. So they use other words such as unalive. So in order to make the things I'm talking about, pointing at individuals makes what I'm talking about much more concrete. But I do think like communal thinking is really important. But also going back to the question, I guess, solidarity is really important. We are not going to change how certain algorithms are deployed by individually fighting big tech corporations. The only way forward is, of course, by unionizing, by coming together, and by building solidarity amongst ourselves. So definitely 100% for that.
So just a reply, thank you for that, Abeba. The just reply is to say thanks and make sense. Algorithms sort of force people into individual boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting to sort of see the ways in which I guess it's in the sense that there's almost like an isolating dynamic about it. So we call it personalization, but what we actually really mean is isolation. We're trying to, make sure that what you see is different to what other people see, and so that you're kind of breaking down a certain amount of shared experience that way, the more you personalize in terms of the information stream. But I think it's sort of struck me when you were speaking there as well that AlgoSpeak, of course, can only work from a place of solidarity.
Yes.
When you change the symbol, when you change the words that you're using, the new word can only work so long as everyone already knows what it means. And that has to come from the solidarity comes first. The specifics follow. And it's interesting to see that the algorithm is just not so good at that solidarity bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Also, it's unfortunate that the way various algorithms are built is. I wasn't going to talk about like a lot of the data work I have done, but I think I'll briefly bring it in. For most algorithms, whether it's recommender systems or large language models or vision systems like face recognition systems, because these models are getting larger and larger with billions of parameters now, that means they need huge amounts of data. They need vast amounts of data. And the only place you can find that kind of data is the internet. So a lot of the data set that's used to train these algorithms comes from the internet. And the internet, as we know, is not a very, just or fair place where everybody's represented equally. For example, people from, some communities in for example, in Ethiopia or Uganda are not going to contribute equally in building a certain knowledge compared to someone, say, for example, living in Ireland. For example, the obvious issue is like there is not equal access. So what you end up is with a really skewed up representation. And when we use that data, and representation is just one of the issues, you find a lot of content that shouldn't be there anyway to begin with when you look at data sets. And you end up kind of, solidifying very tired, cliched, stereotypical understandings of, cultures, genders, sexualities, and that translates into how algorithms work. If the data tends to represent people in stereotypical terms or in negative terms, especially, or the data, to make it short, tends to support or tends to encode the status quo or the view from privileged perspectives. Then when you come to recommender systems or content moderators, then you end up disadvantaging languages or norms or cultures that don't confront, that don't satisfy the status quo. That's how you end up. If you look at any injustice or discrimination or bias in any algorithmic applications, whether it's large language models, generative models, whether it's vision systems or anything, the recurring theme that you find again and again and again is people that are discriminated against, people that are harmed from these algorithmic systems are people that tend to fall, at the margins of society. So, I guess so. What I'm trying to say is the data really has impact in how these algorithms are built and put forward.
It seems that we haven't come to grips yet with what kinds of category we want to use to describe things, because we tend to, the word technology, which has now become synonymous with digital technology and computers, is almost just considered that, and then magic happens. Whereas the kind of defenders of these things will then say, well, it's just a tool, and a tool is neutral and it can be used in many different ways. And yet it's also a magical agent that understands and is, capable of a better, more accurate perception of the world than we can. And it seems to be that there's a sort of a cluster of really quite distinct ways in which the technologies are discussed, which we haven't really got to grips with. Is there? I guess, is there a sense in that that's sort of part of where the problem is, that we don't have a reflective view of what these things are in the first place?
Yeah, so that view that it's just a tool, or it just reflects society, or it just reflects humanity, tends to be a very pervasive one, especially within the machine learning and AI community. Of course, if you look at the history, it's a field that tends to kind of think, all this, looking at history or context or culture as a secondary thing, that shouldn't matter. You should be objective in your inquiry. It's a field that comes from, you look at something, you formulate it into a problem, and then you move on to find a solution, as if like the world presents in a neat, way that you can like write it in a neat problem and find solution. So that thinking that, you can build a tool or you can build technology from a view from nowhere is very, it comes out in the kind of, technologies that are built, and in the kind of arguments people put forward as, so it's very pervasive. But of course, that is not true. Both the enactive and embodied cognition schools of thought, they do highlight how there is no view from nowhere. How, when we formulate a certain question, there is always a person formulating it, that with a certain interest, with a certain objective, with a certain motivation, and of course, all that contributes to the kind of answer you find. Although like one of my constant frustration with the embodied and enactive schools of thought is the lack of attention to structural inequalities and power asymmetries. This is where I go to the Black feminists, because they are excellent at, grappling with this. And of course, power asymmetries, based on your, for example, your gender, your sexuality, where you come from, all these based on all these factors, the social world or the financial world or, the academic world can present an obstacle or present an opportunity. So, all these factors really matter. And again, like when we are building technology, these are all the things that we tend to flatten out. We tend to think, just, person, people, and we tend to think, everybody has an equal space or has equal positionality in the world. And I wish that was true, but since that's not the case, I think it's important to acknowledge this and to incorporate in how we think about technology, rather than push them aside and pretend that we live in an objective world, or we can build objective technology that is neutral, that serves everybody equal.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, it's interesting that this discussion about the ways in which the enactive approach has not been, adequately sensitive to these kinds of systemic power differences is something that's come up quite a bit over the last few years. And I think there's some interesting responses to it now, but it remains an open or ongoing issue. But then I guess it'll probably always be that too. But it's kind of an important way in which there's to address something as pervasive and as powerful as algorithms in modern society. It'll require all of these different. I guess we're back to solidarity in a way, aren't we? There's, in this case, there's a sort of an interesting question then about the importance of solidarity in science. and in both science and engineering, the ways in which, if these things are to be done properly, if the diversity of experiences is to be adequately represented by whether it be enactive or embodied theories or other kinds, and whether tools are to be built in a just manner, then there must be solidarity at the ground of it.
Exactly. And it's this solidarity that's changing a lot. For example, there are a number of states in the US that have managed to ban the use of facial recognition technology for policing. And this is as a result of solidarity. This is as a result of unionizing. This is a result of people coming together. These things wouldn't happen otherwise.
Superb. So I will I'll sort of pause for a moment to allow others to, if there might be another comment or two. But we're coming towards the end of the session. I do very much appreciate you giving, I know you're a particularly busy person at present, so I do very much appreciate you giving us so much of your time this morning.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, and with that, we'll leave it there, but thank you very much, Abeba Birhane, and we will hopefully see people again for another ENSO seminar in the future.
Thank you so much.
Now we are